my favorite things to do as a kid, my family did every summer. In fact, many of you in this room have been on one of these trips with me. We would go when I was a kid, and we would go camping at Beaver's Bend State Park in Oklahoma. And every year on that trip, we would spend one day canoeing and kayaking down the Little Fork River. Anybody, or Mountain Fork River? Anybody kayak down the Mountain Fork River? Really? Okay, a couple of you. All right, you're going to be tracking with me this morning. If you've never been down the Mountain Fork River, it's a really fun way to spend a day, okay? There's two options when you go with a rafting company as you raft or kayak or canoe down the Mountain Fork. There's a 9-mile trip, and there's a 5-mile trip. They recommend that if you're going to take the 9-mile trip, you really need to have at least a little bit of experience under your belt. And if you don't have any experience at all, they recommend you take the 5-mile trip. Now, it's not the distance that makes it harder, but in the top 4 miles, it culminates in a rapid chute S that jumps out over about a 3-foot waterfall. And so in your kayak or in your canoe, you've got to navigate this sharp S turn, and then it spits you out, and you've got about 15 seconds until you come over the top of this waterfall, okay? If you aren't experienced, the recommendation is just take the 5-mile because they drop you in right past the waterfall, and then it's just smooth sailing for the rest of the 5 miles. It's just you and your boat. That's it. That's all you got to do. But that top 3-4 miles, you got to know what you're doing. Well, I remember one particular summer, my group loaded up. We're going to do the 9-mile because that's what we do. We like the rapids. We like the waterfall. It's a lot of fun for us. And so we load up, and as we get into the water, they let you off kind of like by the spillway, by the lake there at Broken Bow. So you get in the water. Well, there was a group that got in the water like right at the same time as we did, okay? It was pretty clear to me at that point in time that this group had never seen a kayak before, much less been on top of one, okay? Now remember, all of that backstory I just told you is relevant to why I tell you that, right? So this group, they get in the water, and somehow, based on the way that they were traveling and the way that we were traveling, we were with this group all day long. We couldn't get in front of them because when we'd get in front of them, we'd stop and swim, and then somehow they'd catch back up to us, right? And so then we would catch back up to them. We'd kind of try to get in front of them, then we'd stop, and then they'd catch back up. So all day long, we're with them, right? So we get about 3 miles down the river, and we now can see the chute in front of us, okay? And so it's game time, baby. This is why we're here. This one stretch of river is why we're here. The problem was that group that was with us when we went into the chute. And so my dad and we got into the chute first, okay? And so we're, going through and feeling like we're just real professionals here, and I'm sticking my oar in and moving us all around, and so we're navigating, right? Well, the inexperienced couple separates our group. So it's me and my dad, and then this inexperienced group, and then my mom and my siblings back behind them, right? And so we're halfway through this chute, and all of a sudden I hear this lady scream, okay? And so I have the wherewithal to turn around and see, and this lady has she's flipped out of her boat. She's lost her shoes, she's lost her oar, she's lost her cooler, she's lost every bit of her whole house that she brought with her. It's just going down the river. Her boat has turned sideways, and she's trapped between her boat and the river. The river is rushing into her boat, and she just cannot handle these waves is what's happening. That's not the worst part of this situation. The worst part was my mom now is coming down behind her. And so this lady, her boat is across the entire chute, and my mom comes down and smashes into this lady, right? So now my mom has lost control of her boat. This lady's pinned in between 2 boats, and the water is rushing. She can't get out. And so me and my dad, we heroically hike back up this chute, right? And we go and rescue this little lady and pick her up out of the water, pick her boat up out of the water, get her down. I don't know what happened to that lady the rest of the day. But what was clear to me was that these waves were too much for her to handle. That the elements of this water were more than she could handle. And so unless someone came, some strapping young 15-year-old lad came and rescued her, she was going to be stuck in these rapids and ultimately succumb to them, right? Why do I tell you that story? Well, number one, I like telling stories about myself. But number two, we've been in this series looking at storms and how God uses storms to bring his people to where he wants them to be, right? So we started all the way back with Noah and his ark, and God created a storm that wasn't Noah's fault at all. In fact, Noah was the only one that was righteous in a world full of sinners. And so God creates this storm to bring Noah through onto the other side, and he preserves the race through Noah, right? That even in the storm, God provided for Noah, he protected Noah, and he pursued Noah even in the midst of that storm, right? Well, the next week, we looked at Jonah and how God used a storm in Jonah's life. And Jonah, the storm was absolutely his fault. In fact, when he gets on the boat and he's headed into the sea, he's escaping God. Do you remember that he's trying to get as far away from God as he can? And so he thinks, okay, if God is the God of the land, then I'm just going to go into the sea. And that's what he does, right? And so Jonah is escaping God, and ultimately the storm is only subsided by them sacrificing Noah into the water, right? That God brings Noah through to bring Noah back to him, or Jonah back to himself. I keep saying Noah. I'm talking about Jonah, so just skip all that, right? Last week we looked at how God used Elijah to remind him that even in the silence, God is there, right? That Elijah had lived this life that was full of highs and lows, and yet in the depths of his despair, God wasn't gone. In the depths of his despair and his depression, that God was there in the silence. And so he uses the storm to reveal that God is sovereign over all of these elements, but that also God is present in the silence, right? And so I hope all of you last week got to eat some carbs and have a nap. David sent me a picture of his carbs and shortly before his nap, so thank you, David. I appreciate you for that. Well, today we're in Mark chapter 4, and we're going to see the first storm that we see in the New Testament here. Mark chapter 4, we're going to start in verse 35. Mark 4:35. It says this, on that day, when evening had come, he told them, let's cross over to the other side of the sea. And so they left the crowd and they took him along since he was in the boat. And other boats were with him. And a great windstorm arose around, and the waves were breaking over the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. He was in the stern, sleeping on the cushion. So they woke him up and they said to him, Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die? And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Silence, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And then he said to them, Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith? And they were terrified and asked one another, Who is this then, that even the wind and the sea obey him? Now, I want to give you one thing for free because I don't have enough time to cover it. There are significant parallels here between a storm story we've already covered. Did you catch the Jonah illusions here? And so what Jesus is doing in this story is he's revealing to himself that one greater than Jonah is here. Remember, Jonah was asleep in the boat and Jesus was asleep in the boat? And then all of a sudden the storm happens, and all of a sudden the storm happens. And then all of a sudden the experienced fishermen don't know what to do, and all of a sudden the experienced fishermen don't know what to do. And so all of a sudden they go wake up the one that's sleeping, and they go wake up the one that's sleeping, and then all of a sudden the storm calms, and there's a great calm. This is a picture that one greater than Jonah is here. But I don't have time to cover that, so you get that for free, okay? So what's going on in this story? Well, this is early in the ministry of Jesus. He has gone and basically is spending his time kind of around the Sea of Galilee here. Okay? He's made his base of operations in Capernaum, which was a fishing village right there on the Sea of Galilee. And he's called a bunch of fishermen to come and follow him. He's got 4 professional fishermen in his group of 12. A full third of his group are professional fishermen that he's called with him, right? And so he's doing missions and ministry and proclaiming that the kingdom of God is at hand all throughout the region right around this Sea of Galilee. And so, he has he started this day kind of teaching and preaching. In fact, when this story takes place in Matthew's gospel, it takes place in Matthew chapter 8. Matthew's 5 through 7 is Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. And so in Mark's gospel, effectively when this takes place is after Jesus gives this big sermon. And so if you look at the beginning of chapter 4, Jesus is standing in a boat and he's speaking to the crowds that had so pressed in around him. He couldn't stay on the shore because there were so many people that wanted to hear what he had to say. So he steps back onto a boat and the boat kind of goes into the shallows. And then he's speaking, which is kind of to an amphitheater. I had this really cool video that I wanted to show you of me on the Sea of Galilee to kind of give you a picture of it. It wouldn't lay up straight. It was laying sideways, and I didn't want you to hurt your necks. So I'm not going to show it, but I'll just describe it to you. The Sea of Galilee is kind of like Lake Bonham, okay? If you go out onto Lake Bonham, at any time, you can look around and see the coast. This isn't some great ocean. I went on a cruise one time, and I got in the middle of the ocean, and I was sitting on the deck of the cruise ship looking out and thinking, if this thing goes down, we're in major trouble, right? I mean, there's just nothing around, right? That's not the case on the Sea of Galilee. In fact, this video, which would have been perfect for this sermon today, is me on the Sea of Galilee in a boat, and it's glass. I mean, it's perfect water skiing water. Crystal clear water with mountains just surrounding. So that's what I'm trying to paint here for you. That the Sea of Galilee is kind of a bowl shape, okay? And so for Jesus to be on a boat in the Sea of Galilee, it's a perfect opportunity for him to speak, and these people can kind of be on the hill and still see him and still hear what he has to say. That it's kind of a natural deal. And so Jesus has been preaching and he's been giving them all of these great things about the kingdom of God. And this is also where we get the beatitude time, where it says, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God," right? And so he begins to preach and preach and preach. He spends all day preaching on this sea. And they finally get to the end of it, and the disciples think, okay, we've got to go to the other side. We've got to get away from these people, right? They can get to the other side eventually, but they're going to have to walk around, and we're in a boat, so we can just go straight across, and we can rest, right? And so they set out across to get to the other side, and as they're going, Jesus lays down and goes to sleep. Now, as an aside, this is one of my favorite aspects of this story, because Jesus is a guy. He's just a dude. Like, he's exactly like you are. He has spent his day loving people and caring for people and serving people. And then he's with his buddies and he finally gets an opportunity to just relax. And so he lays down and goes to sleep, right? And so as he's asleep, all of a sudden the text says, in fact, I'll reread it to you because it's important. It says, verse 37, "A great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking over the boat so that the boat was already being swamped." I want you to underline that word "great" if you've got it in your Bible. Because that word appears 3 times in this text. It doesn't appear in English 3 times, but it does appear in Greek. That word "great" is the Greek word, you're really going to like this one, mega. You say mega? That's where we get our English word mega. That's what that is. It's the Greek word mega. And the reason I want you to underline that word is because that word "great" is kind of painting a picture for us of what's happening. And so these guys, they're in the boat. In fact, I got a picture of the boat. This did work. So show me the picture of the boat. This is a boat that they found from the 1st century. This is kind of like time of Christ boat. It was submerged, it was buried underwater, and some college students were doing some architectural work, and they were diving down into the Sea of Galilee, and they uncovered this boat, and so they had to go in and basically cover it with foam, and then bring it up, and then slowly dry it out. And so this boat is from the time of Jesus. But this is what it looks like. And so what you see here, that's the size of the boat. It's 27 feet long. It's about 7 feet wide. It's about 4 feet deep. The equivalent is like somebody's John boat. If you were to go out to my farm, we've got a John boat laid upside down that if you want to go out into our pond, you flip it over and get in it. If I was my dad, I would have brought a John boat and put it right here on the stage so that you would have seen it, right? But that's what these guys are in, right? And so Jesus is in this. He's in the stern up here. He's laid down asleep, and his disciples are in this little bitty boat. And then all of a sudden, a mega wind storm starts stirring up the water, and the waves begin breaking over the sides of the boat. And so these guys are freaking out. Now, why am I spending so much time talking about this? Because it's a wind storm, not a rain storm, okay? These people, the Israelite people, in fact, Israel today is very predictable with weather patterns. There's only 2 seasons. There's a rainy season and a dry season in Israel. And so in October, it starts to rain, and it rains through about February. And then in February, it's dry until October. That's it. Those are your options. Rainy season, dry season. In the rainy season, it will rain for 3 days, and then it won't rain for 7. And so this is a continual cycle. Even today, it's a rainy season, and they can predict it. In fact, Jesus references this when he's speaking to his followers in Luke 12. He says, when you see a cloud rising in the west, right away you say a storm is coming. And so it does. And when the south wind is blowing, you say it's going to be hot. And so it is. Jesus is aware that these people are able to track storms. He knows what's going on. This isn't a rainstorm. This is a wind storm. And so, if you picture the bowl of the Sea of Galilee, over in the east is an area called the Golan Heights. The Sea of Galilee is surrounded by, you can call them mountains. I'm from here, and I've seen the Rocky Mountains. They're hills. So it's surrounded by these hills. And an eastern wind will come off of those eastern hills and blow down into this bowl, and it's instantaneous, and it's deadly. And so if you're out on a boat in this windstorm, you're in big trouble. And it's not something you can plan for. These guys were prepared. They were in the boat. They're professional fishermen, and yet this storm arises that they were not prepared for. They were caught completely unaware. This is not something they can plan for. And it's a mega storm. This is a great storm, right? And so what's the reaction? These professional fishermen who have grown up on this sea and made their life's earnings on this sea, catching fish from this sea, are what? Mega afraid. They're actually not mega afraid yet. They will be mega afraid. They're terrified right now. They're afraid. And so what happens is these guys are starting to bail out the boat, and they're freaking out. And then they go up to Jesus, and do you see how they approach him? Verse 38, he was in the stern sleeping on a cushion, and so they woke him up and they said, "Teacher, don't you care that we're going to die?" In Matthew's gospel, they say, "Teacher, save us." In Mark's gospel, they say, "Don't you care that we're going to die?" Don't you see this? We're in the middle of this storm. You're with me. Don't you care that we're going to die? Doesn't that matter to you? Don't you care? I don't think these guys were like people without faith, right? You know, they had been around Jesus for a period of time. In fact, if you read through the Gospels up to this point, Jesus has healed the sick. He's healed the lame and the paralyzed. He's raised someone back to life from the dead at this point. His disciples have all seen this. He's cast out demons. So we see that Jesus has power over physical problems. We see that Jesus has authority and power over spiritual problems. And yet, when these guys are met with a storm that they didn't expect, they come to Jesus and say, "Don't you care that we're going to die? Save us. What are you doing? Don't you care?" And so what does Jesus do? Verse 39. He got up and he rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Silence, be still." And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. And then he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" This is the second great here. This is the second mega. There's this mega windstorm that's happening. And then Jesus gets up and he speaks to the sea. He rebukes the wind. That's kind of like he scolds it. It's what you would do with your son if he's jumping off the stage and you don't want him to jump off the stage anymore. You rebuke your son. Not that I've ever had to do that. I have had to do that. I did that this morning. But he rebukes the wind, and then he says to the sea, "Peace, be still." And then it says there's a mega calm that comes over the sea, a great calm. And so you go from this crazy, chaotic storm that nobody could anticipate to a glass-like finish that nobody expected. A mega calm. Why does this matter? Well, in the Hebrew belief system, the one that has power over the seas is exclusively Yahweh. What do these guys say? Who is this guy? It's exclusively Yahweh. If you go through the Psalms, just the Psalms, you don't even have to go anywhere else. Psalm 67 says this: "Praise is rightfully yours, Yahweh in Zion. You silence the roar of the seas, the roar of the waves, the tumult of the nations." In Psalm 89:9, he says this: "I will sing about Yahweh's faithful love forever. You rule the raging sea, and when its waves surge, you still them." My favorite psalm in this vein is Psalm 107. Psalmist writes, "Give thanks to Yahweh, for he is good. His faithful love endures forever. Others went to sea in ships, conducting trade on vast waters. They saw Yahweh's works, his wondrous works in the deep. He spoke and raised a stormy wind that stirred up the waves of the sea. And rising up to the sky and sinking down to the depths, and their courage began melting away in anguish, and they reeled and staggered like a drunkard, and their skill was useless. And then they cried out to Yahweh in their trouble, and he brought them out of their distress. He stilled the storm to a whisper, and the waves of the sea were hushed." What does that sound like? Psalm 107? That's exactly the situation that these guys are in. And these guys are Hebrew guys. The Psalms, you know what Psalms were? They were like worship songs that you would sing at church. So these guys, waves of mercy, waves. These guys are singing them at VBS, okay? They're singing Psalm 107. And they're singing this psalm that says, "Great are you, Yahweh," and praise comes to you. They go out into the sea and they see the mighty works of Yahweh, and the waves are crashing over them, and their skill is useless. And they cry out to Yahweh, and he rescues them. And so what happens to these disciples is that they are in the sea, and the waves are crashing over them, and their own skill is useless. And they cry out to Jesus, but rather than crying out in rescue, they cry out and they say, "Do you care? Don't you care that we're going to drown? Don't you care that we're going to die?" And so Jesus' response when he rebukes the wind and the seas brings us to our third mega. It says these guys were terrified. They were mega afraid. This is a really fun one. I've got to read this one to you because it's so fun. It says that these guys were ephobethesan phobon mega. What that means is, you remember how in Greek there's no punctuation, and so in order to emphasize a word, you say it over and over twice? That's the Greek word phobia, phobeo, phobia. These guys were afraid mega. That's what terrified is in Greek. They were afraid mega. That this guy, who we think is the Messiah, This guy who we've seen raise the dead to life and heal the sick and raise the lame and cast out demons, we believe he's the Messiah. But when he speaks to the wind and the sea, we're afraid mega, because we don't even know who this guy is. He speaks to the sea. This is Yahweh. This is God. And so they come to the other side terrified. Jesus isn't questioning their faith in him as the Messiah. But what he's saying is, do you not have faith in me as the Lord? And so, how does this apply to you? You're not going to go out on Lake Bonham and the waves are not going to come in and you're not going to cry out to Yahweh to save you. That's most likely not going to happen. I would recommend that if you haven't kayaked, don't do the 9-mile of the Mountain Fork. That's my recommendation, right? But I think when we enter into storms, oftentimes it feels for us as if God doesn't even care. This was a storm that they couldn't plan for. This was a storm that happened to blow in. This was a storm that they were involved in and that Jesus was with them, but he was asleep. And it felt for them like, do you even care what's happening to me right now? We're a people who are prone to despair, right? There's a poll that Gallup has run for the last 20 years, and it assesses the optimism that Americans have for both their current life situation and their future prospects over the course of the next 5 years. This year, in February, they ran that poll again. They've been running it for 20 years. And this year, for the first time, even including 2020, American optimism is at an all-time low. Never, according to Gallup, in the course of the last 20 years, has the future looked so bleak, according to Americans. We're a people who are prone to despair. I pulled up a bunch of different news websites this week, and these are real headlines from yesterday. I'm going to read them to you. Bus plunges into river after driver crashes. Plane carrying pickleball team to tournament crashes after vanishing from radar. Dangerous fault line is overdue for earthquake and impacts could be catastrophic. Why Iran's nuclear arsenal is at the center of negotiations. Human remains found in Tampa Bay are identified as missing grad student. I don't have enough outlets. How do I plug in all my stuff? These are all news articles that we've been concerned with. We're people that are prone to despair. That these storms, they begin to blow up out of nowhere. That I've got my life together. That I'm doing everything that I've been told to do. That I'm using my skills and my abilities and my talents the way that God has called me to do them. And then all of a sudden, the rug gets pulled out from under me. Do you even care? Where are you? Do you even care that this is happening to me? We've experienced a lot of death in the last 2 weeks. We experienced death. I don't know if you know this, but our friend Freddie that we've been praying for a month, he passed away last night. Freddie's young. He's 61. He has a heart attack. He goes to the hospital. He spends 25 days in the hospital being cared for. And we're praying and we're praying and we're praying, and then he dies. Do you even care? Where are you? Why is this happening? But the story of this story is that Jesus uses this storm to reveal to his disciples who he is. The first thing is that he hasn't forgotten them, that he does care, that he's asleep because he trusts in the sovereignty of Yahweh to bring them to the other side. And so when he raises from sleep and he calms the storm, he tells them, don't you have faith? Don't you have faith in me? You haven't been forgotten in the storm. But the other thing is, what is God revealing to you in this storm? When God is bringing you through a storm, what is it that he's revealing to you? In your sickness, he's the great healer. What if he doesn't heal you the way that you want? He hasn't abandoned you. If in your sickness that leads to death, then He is the great comforter. In your financial struggles, He's the great provider. In your relationship struggles, He is the perfect and loving Father. In your issues with others, He is a strong tower, a fortress when we're weak. What is God revealing to you about Himself in the midst of this storm? He hasn't forgotten you. He hasn't abandoned you. But He's revealing Himself to you in the midst of this storm. He cares for you. He loves you. Who is this that even the winds and the seas obey Him? Let's pray.